Just days before Christmas in 1992, beloved teacher Christy Mirack was moments away from leaving her apartment for one of her final classes before winter break, armed with the Christmas presents she had wrapped for her students. But the 25-year-old would never arrive at the Lancaster County Elementary School. She was found dead by her school principal just hours later, splayed out across the living room floor after what future Lancaster County District Attorney Craig Stedman described as a brutal struggle. The presents Mirack had so carefully wrapped were strewn about the crime scene. For decades, the murder would haunt the quiet Pennsylvania community, known for its Amish farms and wholesome values, until genetic genealogy revealed an unlikely killer hiding in plain sight. Before her death, Mirack had been a high-spirited and devoted teacher whose life was centered around her students, family, and close-knit group of friends from college, who she had been out dancing with less than 48 hours before her death. "We would go to different clubs and we probably made ourselves known. We're here, come look at us in a fun way," one of her friends later told Dateline correspondent Andrea Canning. After college, some of the girls, including Mirack, had settled in an apartment complex just outside downtown Lancaster, and Mirack began her dream job as a teacher. She wasn't just satisfied with being a good teacher, she wanted to be a great teacher, then Principal Harry Goodman said. She was creative and she had the kids motivated. They were captivated. Some people would drag themselves into work. Christy didn't look at it as work. Every morning, Mirack would arrive before 8 a.m., but on the morning of December 21, 1992, Mirack didn't arrive at her usual time. By 8:30 a.m., the students began to arrive and Goodman was concerned. He phoned her apartment repeatedly, called her family, and then set out to her apartment, thinking he'd likely find her along the way, hampered by car trouble. Just after 9 a.m., he pulled into her apartment complex and noticed her car still sitting untouched in the parking lot. Goodman approached her apartment and made the disturbing discovery that the apartment door had been left ajar. He found the 25-year-old dead inside. Mirack was wearing her gloves, leading investigators to believe she had been leaving the house when her killer pushed her back inside and attacked her. "I think she was overpowered pretty quickly," Stedman said. "I mean, where she was murdered was not far away at all from the entry point. Investigators knew her killer had to be brazen to pull off the daylight attack, but they didn't know who would have wanted to kill the beloved teacher." Mirack's roommate Mary Lesko told police she had left their apartment at around 7 that morning, noting that Mirack had seemed distracted, although she didn't know why. Police began to pore through Mirack's personal life and discovered that before her death she had been dating an older man about 20 years her senior, who went by the nickname Dagger. Her friends hadn't been impressed, but Mirack seemed committed to Dagger, who had worked as the president of the local Teamsters. "I think she felt cared for. I don't even know how, whether that was financially or what, but I think she felt cared for," one of her friends recalled of the unlikely pairing. While her friends didn't know much about Dagger, they knew he wasn't in any rush to get married, something they felt bothered their friend. Then, just 2 days before she was killed, Mirack told her friends that the relationship was ending. Suspicion grew around her secret suitor after a troubling incident at Mirack's school just a day after her murder. One of the school's administrators reported stopping a man in the hallway, who told him he was there to see the slain teacher, claiming he hadn't realized she died. Police later identified the visitor as Dagger. But while the school visit had been unnerving to the school administrator, at the time of the murder, Dagger had an airtight alibi. He had been hundreds of miles away in Virginia, where he had recently moved with his wife. The man also submitted a DNA sample, which didn't match the DNA found at the crime scene as part of the sexual assault. Investigators also ruled out the possibility of a hired hit, noting that hired hitmen don't typically get into hand-to-hand combat with their victim or leave evidence, including DNA, behind. Police even looked into Goodman, the principal who had driven to Mirack's home, after questions arose about whether he had been a little too concerned about his missing teacher. Goodman was later ruled out after his alibi was confirmed and his DNA wasn't a match to the evidence at the scene. "We looked at suspect after suspect after suspect," Stedman said. Mirack's neighbors reported seeing a white car outside her apartment just before the murder, but investigators weren't able to identify any viable suspects with the limited information. Eventually, the case went cold. It wasn't until decades later that investigators decided to use emerging DNA technology to determine the genetic phenotype of the killer. With the help of Parabon Nanolabs, investigators learned in 2016 that Mirack's killer was a mix of Latino and European descent, and created a sketch of what the killer may have looked like using the genetic information. The sketch didn't produce any viable suspects, but when genetic genealogy advancements were made a few years later, allowing investigators to identify relatives of the killer through public DNA database searches, authorities finally got the break they needed. The suspected killer was identified as a popular local DJ, Raymond Rowe. Rowe, who often worked under the name DJ Freeze, had no known connection to Mirack, but had worked at the time of the murder as a DJ at some of the popular clubs. Rowe's day job had also been close to Mirack's apartment, leading Stedman to believe it was possible Rowe frequently drove by her apartment building. "I think it was targeted. I think that she had encountered him at some event before and my guess is, had spurned him, and he saw her out there at that apartment at some point," Stedman said of the possible motive. Investigators confirmed Rowe's DNA matched the evidence left behind at the crime scene. Rowe pleaded guilty to the rape and murder in 2019, but tried to withdraw his plea in 2021, according to Lancaster Online. It was a murder that left the entire city of West Wendover, Nevada, shaken. In 2011, 16-year-old West Wendover High School student Micaela Costanzo, a popular student and track star, was brutally murdered and buried in a shallow grave in the desert outside of town. After an extensive search by residents following Micaela's disappearance, schoolmate and longtime acquaintance Cody Cree Patton, then 18, was arrested and charged with her murder. Then, 2 months after Patton's arrest, a bombshell was dropped by Patton's attorney. He said he had a taped confession from Patton's girlfriend, Toni Fratto, then 19. She, too, was arrested and charged with murder. What later emerged were two conflicting stories about how Micaela died. Though both Patton and Fratto admitted they were present during the girl's death, each had a different account of who delivered the fatal blows and who set the wheels in motion for the crime. Fratto was eventually sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. Patton avoided a potential death penalty by taking a plea bargain. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Dateline NBC is revisiting the Mickey Costanzo murder in a 2-hour program airing Friday at 8 p.m. on KSL, CH5. Dateline reporter Keith Morrison interviewed many of the major players, including Costanzo's family, Fratto from her jail cell, and the attorney for Patton. Neither Cody Patton nor his father agreed to an interview. "It's just a difficult story because the victim was so well liked and so sweet and didn't seem to have an enemy in the world. And so the questions all revolve around why," Morrison said. Patton's attorney, John Olson, said even he didn't understand the reasons why Patton and Fratto did what they did. "There's some reasons given, but they don't add up to this kind of reaction," he said. "They're all out of proportion. A terrible crime that didn't seem to have a logical reason at all, didn't have a reason that even approached logic," Morrison added. Likewise, there were also questions about what happened in the desert where Micaela was killed. Patton said he shoved Micaela to the ground, causing her to hit her head on a rock and go into a seizure, followed by Fratto hitting her on the head with a shovel. Fratto's attorneys say their client then sat on Micaela's legs while Patton slashed her throat. Patton, however, has denied being the one who cut Micaela's throat, maintaining that Fratto did that. "I don't know who did," Olson said. "There are conflicting stories about who did that. I don't think I'm ever going to know. And I don't think it really matters. I think Micaela might have received lethal blows before that happened." Something that was never presented in court were the diaries of Toni Fratto. Olson, who had a copy of them, said the diaries showed Fratto's intense dislike of Micaela. "It was pretty clear this was a young woman who did not like Mickey Costanzo," said Morrison, who was allowed to read Fratto's diaries. "It was clear that she was jealous of Mickey, and worried her boyfriend would find Mickey a better companion. She was a very insecure young woman. She was overflowing in self-doubt. But whether that is proof that she wanted to kill Micaela is up for debate." Morrison said one of the most interesting interviews he conducted for his Dateline story was with Fratto from her jail cell, before she was transferred to prison. Fratto has claimed she was abused by Patton and pressured by him into doing the things that she did. Olson, who was brought into the case because of the possibility of the death penalty, has not had any contact with Patton since he was sentenced in August. The life without parole sentence was something he said he fully expected. There are no attorneys in Elko qualified to handle death penalty cases, and Olson believed there were no attorneys outside of Reno and Las Vegas in Nevada allowed to handle such cases. I've always believed that my clients deserved my objective best without personal involvement and without sentiment, and that's what I try to give them, Olson said. It doesn't mean that I'm not a human being. And there are cases that stick with me, one of them almost made me quit practicing law. And I'm not going to forget this one soon. The man officials believe is responsible for killing a Texas prison guard 3 years ago in Shepherd was arrested this month. Robert Dale Clary was arrested in connection to the murder of 59-year-old Rhonda Richardson. In 2019, the San Jacinto County Sheriff's Office responded to a call about a woman found dead in the Sam Houston National Forest. Authorities say Richardson's body was discovered near her home by two people riding an ATV on a trail in a wooded area of the National Forest on May 22, 2019. One of those persons was Clary, but he never notified officials. Officials say he told his family and asked his nephew to call it in, saying that if he did it, he would be considered a suspect since he lived close by and knew her. Clary even returned to the scene with his nephew and took photos of the body. Authorities were finally notified of the dead body by his nephew. Officials said Richardson had multiple slashes on her body and blunt force trauma to her head and face and had been lying dead in the heat for several days. What made detectives think it was a murder possibly connected to where she worked was that she still had her jewelry on. Richardson worked at the Polunsky unit of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. TDCJ investigated the prison system to determine if she had been a target. They didn't find anything. Officials said Richardson had been with TDCJ for 25 years and had already announced that she would be retiring in a few months. Investigators say they were suspicious of Clary from the beginning. Officials found out that a few days before Richardson was found dead, she asked neighbors to help look for her missing dogs. Clary was one of her neighbors that volunteered to help. Authorities say he was the last person Richardson was seen alive with. After talking to other persons in the area, they learned that she was seen on his ATV with him. Search warrants were obtained and a search was done of Clary's residence. Items from the home including the ATV and a rug back were taken to a crime lab in Montgomery County for analysis. Detective Gary Sharpen noted that Clary had been arrested multiple times in the past. He had 5 prior DWI cases and had served criminal time at the TDCJ. June of 1990, November of 1991, June of 1992, 1994, and June of 2003. Officials say Clary had several assault charges in Harris County both in 1998 and 2004. Even after the FBI and U.S. Forest Service investigative unit got involved, the case still went cold. Harris County prosecutor Kelly Siegler, host of the Cold Justice television show, joined in on the case. With ongoing technological advancements, forensics experts wanted to review previous evidence. They were able to take Richardson's cell phone coordinates and trace them to the last location, which was almost where she was found. They then did the same for Clary's phone. His phone coordinates put him very close to where her last point was. With this evidence, Detective Sharpen received the arrest warrant and escorted Clary into the San Jacinto County Jail. Richardson's family members finally received justice. It was a needle in a haystack investigation, Sharpen said. We didn't have any video surveillance. We didn't have any other eyewitness that came forward. A man convicted of separate knife-point sex assaults in Southern California dating back to 1995 will spend the next half-century in prison, a judge decided Thursday. Christopher VanBuskirk, 47, was arrested in Goodyear, Arizona, on April 29, 2019 in connection with the sex assaults, 4 of which date back 24 years. He was extradited to San Diego, faced charges for 4 of the cases, which allegedly happened in San Diego County over the course of 3 months in 1995. According to investigators, the first knife-point sex assault happened on August 18, 1995. 3 more similar attacks followed between that date and November 17, 1995. SDPD Lieutenant Sean Takeuchi told NBC7 that investigators have spoken to the 4 San Diego victims and said they were each shocked and ecstatic to hear of VanBuskirk's arrest. The first assault on August 18, 1995, happened on the 11100 block of Claremont Mesa Boulevard near the Tierra Santa Recreation Center. In her impact statement, read to the court by her mother prior to VanBuskirk's sentencing, the victim explained how she was jogging when she saw VanBuskirk's scary, masked face emerge from the bushes. "I asked if you were going to rape me, and you said yes," she said in her letter, who was 18 years old at the time of the attack. She detailed the uncomfortable investigation that followed, and explained how after she was examined by police I was given a morning after pill so that I would not become pregnant with your demon child. Thank goodness for that. The victim also told the court how she has panic attacks now when her teenage daughter goes out alone. "I know that God in heaven forgave you a long time ago. I wouldn't be that nice. And I encourage you to read the Bible as you face your long dark days in your prison cell," she said in closing. The second assault took place on October 10, 1995, on the 7300 block of Mesa College Drive. Takeuchi said that victim was attacked while inside her daughter's apartment. The victim read her own impact statement in court. The victim explained how she arrived at her apartment with her hands full and flipped on the light with her elbow. She was immediately grabbed from behind and a gloved hand covered her mouth. "I don't know how long it took because I was so afraid of what was coming next," she said. Her boyfriend walked into the apartment moments after and police were called. She remembered racing to the bathroom to try and clean herself, but officers instructed her not to. As if the rape wasn't enough, having to be put through an examination to collect samples and evidence only compounded my agony. "It was another experience I would never wish on my worst enemy," she said. She went on to explain the moment an SDPD detective investigating the case knocked on her door last year to tell her about VanBuskirk's arrest. "I burst into tears of shock and disbelief. I thought I would die without knowing who raped me. I wanted to hug the detective, but I couldn't. I asked him to leave and come back with a woman so I could feel safe giving him a hug," she said. She pleaded for the judge to give VanBuskirk the maximum sentence allowed. The third sex assault came on November 14, 1995, when a victim was attacked inside her home on the 3800 block of Catamarca Drive. In her victim statement, she explained how she came home after a college class. She was 20 at the time of the rape, and was confronted inside by a masked man who put a knife to her throat and threatened to kill her if she made any noise. "The terror and fear that I experienced is not something I can explain," she said. "That fear has followed her every day of the 24 years that have passed since the rape," the victim said. "I'd made life decisions, such as not having children, because I felt like it would be impossible to protect them from bad things," she explained. "This is an event that I will never get over. The fear that I have about being alone is forever. The trust issues are forever and the negative impact is forever, and he did this to me," she added. 3 days later, on November 17, 1995, the suspect struck again. That time, a victim was attacked inside her home on the 1900 block of Missouri Street. In all 4 cases, investigators collected DNA samples. All 4 samples belonged to the same suspect, but investigators, at that time, were not able to identify the suspect. In 1999, when the San Diego Police Department began participating in the combined DNA index system, investigators were still unable to find a match for the mystery DNA samples collected at the sex crimes 4 years prior. The cases remained unsolved. Then, in March 2002 and November 2004, DNA samples were collected from 2 victims of sexual assaults in Riverside County. Both of those victims were attacked at knifepoint. The samples matched SDPD's mystery samples from the 1995 cases. Nearly 15 years later, investigators finally got their big break in the case they had long been after. In February 2019, the SDPD's Sex Crime Unit reached out to the FBI for help. The 2 agencies worked together and, with the help of public access genealogical databases, were able to identify a potential suspect in all 6 sex assault cases, VanBuskirk. Through their investigation, officials identified direct family members of VanBuskirk whose DNA was then compared to the samples developed from evidence at the scenes of the crimes. Investigators traced VanBuskirk's whereabouts to Arizona, where he was most recently living, and arrested him. An extradition document filed with the Maricopa County Superior Court in Arizona after VanBuskirk's arrest stated the suspect is married and has a child. He had been living with his family in Goodyear, Arizona, for the past 7 years, the document said. Investigators said anyone who believes they may have been a victim of VanBuskirk can reach out to San Diego police. an heir to a $2 million trust fund, disappeared nearly 4 years ago. In June 2022, authorities in Pennsylvania arrested his former romantic partner, who allegedly stabbed the victim to death, used his phone to pretend he was still alive, and drained his allowance money. The heir, Rashid Young, 22, was reported missing in December 2019 in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, according to the Montgomery County District Attorney's Office. For years, his family has pleaded for answers on his whereabouts. They recently hired a private investigator who requested Montgomery County detectives look into Young's disappearance, the district attorney's office said in a statement. Through an investigation that began 2 weeks ago, authorities learned that Young's body was actually found weeks after he was killed in August 2019, according to the statement. The body was found by a landscaper at the Auberry Arboretum in Philadelphia on September 30, 2019, but was unidentified for years. Using dental records, the body was identified Friday as belonging to Young, the district attorney's office said. The investigation led to the arrest of Keyshawn Sheffield, 20, of Philadelphia, who police said was in a romantic relationship with Young for 2 years when Young vanished, according to officials. Their relationship came to light through cell phone records, help from a confidential informant, and other means, prosecutors said. Sheffield is accused of stabbing Young in his apartment in Pottstown on August 19, 2019, according to the release. Police were called to Young's apartment at that time on a report of flooding and found the unit intentionally inundated with water. The apartment had holes in walls, broken doors, and trash strewn throughout, authorities said. It is not clear what happened after police made the discovery. From August to December 2019, Sheffield used Young's social media accounts and phone to communicate with his family and make it appear that he was still alive, officials said. He also made numerous withdrawals from Young's $2 million trust fund before Young was declared missing, according to prosecutors. Young received an $800 allowance every 2 weeks from the fund, NBC Philadelphia reported, citing a criminal affidavit and investigators. Bank records showed that between July 2019 and December 2019, someone made 15 fund transfers from Young's bank account to an account owned by Sheffield, the affidavit stated. The account was frozen in December 2019. The Montgomery County investigation found that Sheffield transported Young's body in a Pottstown Borough recycling container to a house in Philadelphia, where Sheffield lived with his mother, the district attorney's office said. With the assistance of another person, Sheffield dug a hole at Auberry Arboretum and buried his body there, where it was found by a landscaper who called police, prosecutors said. The investigation also included an admission from another former lover of Sheffield, who allegedly confessed to helping Sheffield bury Young's body. That person's name has not been released. Sheffield was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, third-degree murder, theft by unlawful taking disposition, receiving stolen property, possessing an instrument of crime, and access device fraud. He was denied bail and his preliminary hearing is set for June 9. A message was left with the office of Sheffield's attorney seeking comment. Since August 2019, a family has been searching for information about their missing son. Today, we shared with them the tragic details of his death and will be able to return his remains to them for a proper burial, said District Attorney Kevin R. Steele said in a statement. Judge William R. Carpenter, who accepted a plea agreement in the matter, immediately sentenced Sheffield to 12.5 to 30 years in prison. We'll never know exactly what happened in that apartment, but there was a physical altercation between the two of them and the defendant stabbed Rashid to death with a knife, and afterward he got 2 friends to unwittingly help him dispose of Rashid's body, Deputy District Attorney Thomas W. McGoldrick said. Sheffield was 17 at the time of the killing. Third-degree murder is a killing committed with malice, which under the law is defined as a hardness of heart, wickedness of disposition, cruelty, recklessness of consequences, or extreme indifference to the value of human life. By pleading guilty, Sheffield avoided a potential conviction of first-degree murder, which is an intentional killing and carries a life prison term. McGoldrick explained prosecutors resolved the case with a plea agreement after considering Sheffield's young age at the time of the crime and mitigation presented by the defense. During a preliminary hearing last year, defense lawyer Marnie Jo Snyder hinted at a trial strategy of self-defense and suggested that Sheffield may have been a victim of domestic violence at times during the relationship. Kimberly Cyrus, the victim's mother, said Sheffield will never understand the depths of despair my family had to go through. Our entire world fell apart, Kimberly Cyrus said. Sheffield did not address the courtroom before the sentence was imposed and said nothing as he was escorted from court by sheriff's deputies to begin serving the sentence. For nearly 4 decades, the Grabble family of North Andover has waited for answers about what happened to their sister, their daughter, their loved one Claire before her body was found, strangled, in the woods off Route 128 in Beverly. On Friday, a little past noon, they learned just a little more about her brutal death, as a prosecutor confirmed for the first time that the DNA of John Carey, collected more than a decade ago after his conviction in another strangulation, was found on Grabble's pink tank top. That tank top, prosecutor Kim Fadella told a judge, was found wrapped around the young Salem State student in a figure 8. Claire Grabble was just 20, and was last seen alive on June 28, 1986, after visiting Major Magley's pub on Washington Street with her softball team and then being dropped off at her Loring Avenue apartment. Her body was found 2 days later on June 30. The confirmation, which in August led to a grand jury indictment against Carey, 63, formerly of Gloucester, couldn't have come soon enough, as Carey had been expected to be released on parole from state prison for the 2007 Hamilton strangulation as early as January. Now, his attorney conceded Friday at Carey's arraignment on charges related to Grabble's murder that parole in that case is unlikely, and Carey will face life without parole if convicted in Grabble's death. Today is the first day on the road to justice, the day we didn't think was coming but is finally here, and now we're just waiting for the court process to take its course, Bob Grabble Jr. told reporters outside court Friday. He was accompanied by 86-year-old Bob Grabble Sr., his and Claire's father, along with brothers Mark and James. Claire, he said, is always on my mind. When I leave here, on my way home I'm going to the cemetery to go talk to her and tell her what happened. Carey, who appeared via video from MCI Sousa Baranowski and Shirley, bellowed the words not guilty when asked for his answer to the charges. Earlier in the hearing, his lawyer, John Apruzis, unsuccessfully attempted to hide his client from view, asking in a motion that the video monitor be shut off. Apruzis told Judge Salim Tabet that he's concerned about tainting the potential jury pool, and fretted about other witnesses potentially coming forward and future identifications. Tabet dismissed both concerns. The judge said he anticipates that the case, which drew reporters from 3 Boston television stations and a newspaper reporter and photographer, will continue to receive extensive publicity regardless of whether Carey is hidden from view. I suspect it will garner much attention whether his face is shown or not, said Tabet. The judge also suggested that it's unlikely for anyone to recognize Carey as the same man they might have seen 36 years ago. Time stands still for no one, Tabet told the lawyer. Fadella also pointed out that photos of Carey, taken by a Salem News photographer during his 2008 trial in the Hamilton strangulation case, have appeared in local newspapers again since the indictment. Tabet granted the prosecutor's request to hold Carey without bail, which is standard in all first-degree murder cases. A jury found Carey guilty of attempted murder, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Carey had been due for early release on good behavior. Rosemary had been alerted to his release and was grateful that the new indictment had prevented him from being released, as she had been scared that he would come after her again if he got out. Police say they have made an arrest more than 3 decades after the murder of a young woman in Mesa. Thomas Cox was arrested in Colorado Springs and extradited back to Arizona after DNA and fingerprint evidence allegedly linked the 58-year-old to the crimes, according to reports. Susan Amy Morse was discovered dead in her Mesa apartment on October 16, 1989, after she failed to show up to work and her concerned parents requested a welfare check, according to the court records and in news releases from police. The 22-year-old had been beaten, sexually assaulted and asphyxiated with an extension cord. She was found dead in her bed with the covers pulled up around her, authorities said. The next year, in November of 1990, there was another break-in at the same apartment complex. The 23-year-old woman in that case reported that a man crawled in through a window. She woke up to find the man holding a knife to her stomach, and he told her that he was not going to hurt her, just rape her, according to the court records. She was sexually assaulted, but survived. The attacker also stole cash and a VCR from the home. For decades the cases remained unsolved, until a new investigation led authorities to Cox, whose mother had lived next door to Morse at the time of her murder. He had never been considered a suspect in either case, authorities said. The break in the case came through genetic genealogy. Authorities used DNA recovered from the crime scene to develop a family tree for the suspect and were able to identify Cox as a likely suspect in the crimes. The DNA match was confirmed after investigators staked out his Colorado Springs home and recovered a styrofoam cup, lid, and straw from the trash, which was discovered to have DNA that matched the crime scene evidence. Investigators say they were also able to match a print located on a screen that had been removed from one of the victim's windows to prints taken from Cox for misdemeanor offenses committed in the late 80s and early 90s. Mesa Police Sergeant Chuck Trapani told local station KSAZ-TV the surviving victim was also pleased a suspect has been arrested. Cox was linked to an attack on an unnamed victim around November 13, 1990, documents show. The court documents say Cox was indicted on a total of 16 counts in the two cases, including first-degree murder, sexual assault, burglary, and kidnapping. He was recently located in Colorado Springs, Colorado, where he had reportedly been living, according to police documents. On April 23, Cox was extradited to Maricopa County from El Paso County. Cox is being held on a $1 million cash bond. The family of Columbus native Albert Woolfolk understands something few people never have had to face: the agonizing wait for answers in the unsolved murder of a loved one. It's been very, very hard over the years, Woolfolk's wife Frances said as she reflected on the past years of searching for answers and justice. It's been 17 years now, and it's something you go through each day. You never forget it, but you try to continue on each day. Woolfolk's brother Gene also feels the tormenting agony of the unsolved mystery constantly haunting his family. You live with the thought every day of what happened, knowing that somebody killed your brother. That person is still out there and still walking around free and has not paid for what he's done either, said Gene Woolfolk. That's what we're mainly trying to do, is hold somebody responsible for this act. On July 18, 2003, the 45-year-old father of four was discovered murdered inside his home on Habersham Avenue. Family members had entered into the home and had discovered his lifeless body, said Detective Stuart Carter, a member of the Columbus Police Department who, now retired, returned to CPD part-time to focus his full attention on unsolved murder investigations. It was apparent he was a victim of a homicide. Definitely, he was killed inside the home, said Carter. Columbus police have not publicly revealed how Woolfolk was murdered, but do say the crime was brutal. But they are talking about the time frame and circumstances of his last known moments and releasing some new information in the case that investigators hope will bring new leads. We strongly believe that Mr. Woolfolk likely was murdered the early morning hours of July 17, 2003, even though he, technically, was not discovered deceased until the 18th, said Detective Carter. The last time anyone reported seeing Woolfolk alive was the night of July 16, 2003. Detectives say witnesses saw him leaving Coach's Corner Sports Cafe, a business no longer open. But in 2003, the establishment was located in the shopping center at 3709 Gentian Boulevard. He was seen leaving the parking lot in his vehicle, which was a silver Jaguar convertible, said Detective Carter. However, Detective Carter says that Woolfolk did not leave Coach's alone. Witnesses say 2 African American men and 1 white man were with him as he departed that evening. While police make it clear these men are not necessarily responsible for Woolfolk's murder, they want to find them for questioning. One promising lead is the increased information detectives have learned about the white man, whom they call a person of interest. He's described as being between 25 to 28 years old back in 2003. That would mean he is now in his mid-40s. Other identifying characteristics include, he was between 5'10" and 6 foot tall with a medium build. He enjoyed playing pool, so he frequented not only Coach's, but also the Red Ryder Lounge, then, too, inside the same Gentian Boulevard shopping center as Coach's and Scooters, formerly on Sidney Simon Boulevard. All of those establishments have since gone out of business. Police also say the white man had his hair cut military style or was possibly bald. They add he was a heavy drinker. But these are not the only things police have learned. When he became intoxicated, he became a very violent individual, said Detective Carter. Detective Carter asks that anyone who frequented Coach's, Red Ryder, or Scooters back in 2003 to try and recall if these characteristics bring anyone to mind. If so, they should contact him. He stresses that even if someone thinks what they remember is not important, it could bring a vital clue to the investigation. Detective Carter adds the case has gained momentum this year. Police have learned new information from witnesses and some items are being processed for DNA. Woolfolk's family says they find comfort in knowing there's still hope of finding justice, even after years of waiting. "I pray every night that one day somebody will come forth and be able to solve this for us," said Francis Woolfolk. Woolfolk's brother Gene does all he can to continue to fight for justice in his brother's case. He manages a Facebook group devoted to keeping the unsolved murder in the public eye. Investigators obtained a warrant for the arrest of Alvin Shane Barfield in December 2020. He was arrested in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Columbus Chief of Police Freddie Blackman did not comment on what evidence led investigators to developing Barfield as a suspect and later charging him. "Our ongoing partnerships with federal, state, and local agencies have, once again, led to outstanding results," said Myrtle Beach Chief of Police Amy Morse. "Our city is safer today, and Mr. Barfield will be held accountable for his actions, thanks to the hard work and dedication of police officers in South Carolina and Georgia." Barfield is currently being held in the J. Reuben Long Detention Center in Conway, South Carolina, where he awaits extradition to Columbus. Police say there is still no known motive or narrative in the slaying of Virginia Hannon, a Pembroke woman who was brutally killed in 1984. But for the first time Thursday, police said they know who killed her, Jesse Aylward. "I would love to be able to tell you exactly what happened in the case of Mrs. Hannon, but I can't," Plymouth County District Attorney Tim Cruz said. "All I can tell you is the evidence we have. We are confident that Aylward did it." In a news conference Thursday afternoon, Cruz stood in front of the Hannon family to announce that DNA evidence has linked Aylward, a Brockton resident who died a year ago, to the murder of 59-year-old Hannon. Police don't know of any connection between Aylward and the victim, nor do they have a clear motive, but Cruz said DNA evidence on broken glass, a pair of stockings and bloody paper towels taken from the scene prove that Aylward is the man who eluded police for almost 4 decades. "There are still a lot of questions we would like to answer," former Pembroke Police Chief Rick Wall said. "We may never get all of the answers, but we're never going to stop looking for exactly what happened." Pembroke Police said 37 years of investigative work ultimately came down to a phone call. In February of last year, Cruz said a tipster called police to say Aylward, a friend who was living on Crescent Street in Brockton, had confessed to a Pembroke murder some time earlier. The tipster waited until the day after Aylward died to turn him in. Beth Stone, a spokeswoman for the Plymouth County DA's office, said the tipster was interviewed by police. Authorities are not pursuing charges against him or her at this time. After the call, police obtained a warrant for the blood of Aylward, whose body was still at Brockton Hospital. They used modern technology to match Aylward's DNA to blood found on 3 pieces of evidence taken from the scene in 1984. Police had reanalyzed the evidence in January 2019 and discovered all of the DNA evidence belonged to one unknown man. Cruz said Hannon and Aylward, who was 58 at the time of his death, had no obvious connection or relationship. He also said there is still no clear motive for the slaying. Police told the Patriot Ledger 2 years ago that they'd long been operating under the assumption the killing was the result of a break-in gone wrong. It was widely known in town that Hannon had recently inherited quite a bit of money from a relative. On Thursday, Cruz said there is no proof that theory is correct. "The DNA gets us to the people but doesn't necessarily get us to exactly what happened," he said. "I'm always hopeful we will be able to get that information to make sure we can give some final resolution to the victims in these cases. The victims are something that is never forgotten." Cruz said Aylward had a police record, and officials have a Plymouth County mug shot taken in 1986, but did not provide more details when pressed. The district attorney said a lot of people were on the radar of Pembroke Police in connection to Hannon's death, but that he wasn't aware if Aylward was one of them. On February 12, 1984, Hannon was 59, widowed and living alone when someone broke into her home, kicked, punched, stabbed and strangled her, and left her body covered in a sheet on her bed. The killing has been described by now-retired Detective Sergeant Ted Kane as brutal and violent. Investigators in 1984 said Hannon had been stabbed once in the eye and 6 times in the abdomen and kicked so hard the killer left an imprint of his shoe on her body. The slaying coincided with housebreaks in the area, and police said it could have been motivated by the widespread knowledge that she'd recently inherited $380,000 from an aunt in California. Hannon's closest family, her nephew, his wife, and their 2 daughters, have remained in touch with police and spoke to a Patriot Ledger reporter in 2019 about their hopes that the case would one day be solved. Judy Hannon, Virginia Hannon's niece by marriage, said she believes Aylward is just one piece of a bigger puzzle. "I think there is more to the story and I'm praying people come forward," she said after the news conference Thursday. "Tell us Aylward's story. We deserve to know." Judy Hannon was Virginia's niece, but, more importantly, her friend, she said. She called the revelation bittersweet, and said she would have rather seen the killer led away in handcuffs. When police updated the Hannon family on the potential lead and showed them a photo of Aylward, Judy Hannon said she'd seen him around town in the past. She'd never spoken to him and didn't know his name, she said, but she'd seen him several times. Cruz said he did not know where Aylward was living in 1984. "I'd seen his face. I didn't know his name, but sure I'd seen him through the years. From what I know, he was from Pembroke, but I don't know anymore," Judy Hannon said. "I just don't understand why they had to kill her, and we deserve to know." Richard Hannon, Virginia Hannon's nephew, said he hopes getting Aylward's name out in public will inspire people who knew him to come forward, or may jog a memory they didn't know they had. "Maybe something will shake loose in somebody's head like, oh, I know that guy, and give us a little more information of who he was, why he was," he said. "Because it was senseless. They got nothing. They just killed her for whatever. I don't understand it." Virginia Hannon's slaying was the first homicide in the town in 10 years, and the violence stood out in the usually quiet community, which had a population of only 13,000 at the time. "It shook everyone up," Detective Kane, a part-time officer at the time of the slaying and lead detective on the case since 1998, told the Ledger 5 years ago. "I've said this before, but when she was murdered you could hear the locks across Pembroke, cars and front doors, being locked," Kane said. "I've lived in Pembroke my whole life, and people used to leave their doors unlocked and keys in their cars. But this changed things." Miranda Fenner fought hard to stay alive. The 18-year-old clerk at the movie store, a video store in Laurel, Montana, was found crawling out of the store the evening of November 18, 1998, with multiple stab wounds to the head and neck, including a slashed throat. She died at a hospital about 90 minutes later. Fenner's homicide eventually went cold, becoming Yellowstone County's most notorious unsolved case. The county sheriff's office in 2012 created a cold case unit dedicated to solving cases just like Fenner's, cases that, for want of new leads or technological breakthroughs, had stalled in their tracks. After more than 20 years, detectives' efforts have paid off, Yellowstone County Sheriff Mike Linder said Tuesday afternoon in a news conference. Zachary David O'Neill, 39, was arraigned and pleaded guilty Tuesday to murder in Fenner's brutal slaying. O'Neill also pleaded guilty to attempted murder and rape in a September 1998 attack on a woman helping her daughter deliver newspapers in Billings, West End. Though that woman was also stabbed and had her throat cut, she survived. O'Neill is set to be sentenced August 23. Reports show that prosecutors and defense attorneys have agreed to recommend concurrent life sentences in the 2 cases. They have also agreed not to charge O'Neill with a second rape case to which he confessed, the Gazette reported. O'Neill, in return, has agreed to stay in Montana and not be returned to Washington state, where he had been serving a prison sentence since December 2017 on burglary and weapons charges. That sentence is due to end in 2024. Charging documents in the Fenner case showed that the man who first spotted the mortally wounded young woman in front of the video store thought she had been shot in the neck. When Laurel police officers arrived, the front of her body was drenched in blood. The amount of blood made it difficult for them to determine where she was hurt, the court documents state. As the officers attempted to help her, she was unconscious, unresponsive, and did not communicate with them. She had only a weak pulse. The officers were able to determine Fenner's throat had been slashed. As she was rushed to the hospital and into surgery, where she was soon pronounced dead, officers found disarray inside the store and the back door standing open. They also found a trail of blood from the back of the store to the front, where Fenner had crawled and dragged herself outside seeking help. Detectives and area law enforcement continued their work in the following days and weeks but were unable to locate a suspect or suspects in the homicide of Miranda Fenner, the charging documents say. The case remained open and investigators continued their work. Investigators have interviewed hundreds of people since. Infamous Billings cold case comes to an end. Incredible, this guy out on the streets for 20 years. Linder said Tuesday that O'Neill, who himself was 18 when Fenner was killed, was first interviewed by detectives as early as 2000 in connection with the homicide. At the time, he denied involvement but gave detectives the names of other individuals who he said might have committed the crime. Detectives meticulously investigated the information O'Neill had provided. This information was still being looked at as recently as the last couple of years, Linder said. Investigators' focus changed in 2013 when they received a tip that O'Neill was Fenner's true killer. That tip came from O'Neill's former stepmother, court documents show. The woman, whose name was redacted in the charging documents, was unable to give specifics but told investigators O'Neill was a very violent person when they lived in Laurel in 1998. She described a few specific incidents that troubled her, the documents state. She said on several occasions over the years, her husband mentioned that Zach rented a movie on the night of the homicide. Cold case detectives Frank Fritz and Shane Bancroft, who took on the case in 2012, confirmed that O'Neill lived in Laurel at the time Fenner was killed, but had no other evidence linking him to the homicide, the documents say. Fritz and Bancroft received a similar tip in March 2017, this time from O'Neill himself. Linder said an intoxicated O'Neill went to the Yellowstone County Jail and told employees there that he'd killed Fenner. We had deputies go down there and talk to him and get, basically, what information they could from him, Linder said. They said he was obviously either on something or coming down from something, but they took that information and they passed it on to our detectives. The charging documents detail what O'Neill said happened the night Fenner died. In his March 19, 2017, statement to deputies, as well as his interview with Fritz and Bancroft 2 days later, O'Neill said he went to the movie store and rented some movies that afternoon. The detectives were able to determine that O'Neill rented 4 movies the night of the murder on his stepfather's account. One of the films was a pornographic movie. O'Neill told the investigators that when he got home with the tapes, his mother made him return the porn film. It was on his second trip to the video store that he said he killed Fenner. O'Neill told investigators he had been committing robberies and burglaries to support his methamphetamine, marijuana, and crack cocaine habit. O'Neill said when he went back to the store the second time, he thought he knew he was going to rob it, the charging documents say. He said there were other customers in the store at the time, so he waited around in the store for a few minutes to buy some time. O'Neill told the detectives once he and Fenner were alone in the store, he pulled a gun on her and demanded the store's cash. Fenner complied and then put her hands in the air. He said he forced Fenner into a back room, where he bound her with tape, the document says. He feared she might know who he was, however. That was when he pulled out his knife. I tried to slit her throat, but it was too jagged and emotional, O'Neill is quoted telling the detectives. I could hear her gurgling on her own blood. O'Neill wept as he described the scene, the charging documents state. I can still hear that sound, he told the detectives. Thinking he heard someone come through the front door of the store, O'Neill fled out the back, according to the documents. O'Neill's descriptions of the scene and Fenner's injuries were consistent with crime scene photos and the findings of her medical and autopsy records, the documents state. He also accurately described Fenner's clothing and glasses she wore the night she was slain. It was during O'Neill's March 21, 2017, confession in Fenner's slaying that he admitted his involvement in the 1998 attack on the newspaper Carrier. I see this lady and I decided to rape her, he told the detectives, according to court documents. O'Neill was charged in the Carrier's attack in January of this year, according to KTVQ in Billings. Documents obtained by the news station earlier this year indicate that the woman told police she was walking down the street when she heard someone running up behind her. She was put in a chokehold and held with a knife to her throat as her assailant forced her between 2 buildings. He forced her shorts down and raped her, telling her, "I'm not going to hurt you. I'll let you go when I am done," KTVQ reported. As the woman tucked herself into a fetal position following the sexual assault, her attacker began slashing at her throat. The woman told investigators she pretended to die to get him to leave. The victim was found with stab and slash wounds to her throat, as well as defensive wounds to her arms, the news station reported. According to the charging documents in the Fenner case, the DNA from semen found in a used condom at the rape scene matched O'Neill's genetic profile. The Billings rape and attempted murder cold case was solved, but Yellowstone County investigators needed more corroboration to charge him with Fenner's slaying. Fritz and Bancroft talked to a friend of O'Neill's who had known him since he was 12 years old. That friend told the detectives O'Neill had admitted his role in the crime to him about 2 months before he confessed to the investigators. SB said his jaw dropped and he began to sob because he knew Miranda and her family, the charging documents say. He said he became upset and told O'Neill that he did not want to hear any details. The friend told the investigators he convinced O'Neill, who lost a stepbrother in an April 2013 fire for which multiple people were convicted, that Fenner's family deserved the same justice for Miranda that O'Neill's family got for his stepbrother. SB said he was the one who drove O'Neill to the sheriff's office in March 2017 for the interview with detectives, the documents state. Fritz and Bancroft again interviewed O'Neill that May in Spokane, where he had been arrested on the burglary and weapons charges for which he was ultimately convicted. At that time, O'Neill gave the investigators information regarding a rape he said he committed in Riverfront Park in Billings, 1 week after the attack on the newspaper carrier. O'Neill's DNA profile matched the one from the suspect in that case, as well, the court documents state. The victim in the third case died in 2013. O'Neill told detectives, as his friend had, that he began feeling remorse for his crimes after losing his stepbrother, the documents say. He said in his March interview that he was depressed and suicidal. He also reiterated his guilt in Fenner's death. I killed her and I raped a couple more girls, the document says. The investigation into O'Neill's crimes remains ongoing. Authorities said Tuesday that charges in the Fenner case took so long because of the need for corroboration. The case was also complicated by the fact that multiple other people had confessed to committing the crime over the years. I'm going to say that we had about 5 to 7 people through the years have either directly or indirectly confessed to this crime, Bancroft said Tuesday. And, of course, every single one makes us perk up our ears. Fenner's family requested privacy as they deal with the new developments in the case. In a statement they issued Tuesday through Monty Wallace, the cold case coordinator for the sheriff's office, they thanked everyone who has supported them through the 2 decades it took to find justice, as well as the investigators involved in the case during that time. We're relieved that there is an end in sight for the nightmare that's caused so much heartache and pain to everyone who knew and loved Miranda, the family's statement read. Unfortunately, nothing will bring Miranda back and we can only pray that other families may be spared the grief that this type of crime inflicts. Fenner's mother, Sherry Fenner, told the Gazette in 2012 that they faced the pain of her absence each day. We live every single day without her, and I hope they live every day with the knowledge that they killed her, Sherry Fenner told the newspaper. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe and like the video, and click the bell icon to stay tuned.